Have you ever looked at the price of a Gravy Bones deck and thought,
I mean, it's not like I have to pay my rent.
me too. I'm getting evicted. But in order to help save you from suffering the same fate, today I'm bringing you a powerful budget Gravy Bones deck that you can actually afford. This deck costs around $120 or so, and I've been winning way more games on it than I should be. In this video, I want to give you a breakdown of this budget Gravy Bones deck, sharing the process I took to build it over the few iterations that led me to this video. After that, I'll treat you to a bit of delicious gameplay so that you can see the deck in action. So let's look at how I took my tuned Gravy Bones list and turned it into this absolute beast of a budget deck. So before I start breaking down my process, I do want to say up front that you are going to need to buy a Gravy Bones Armory deck if you want to build this. The Necromancer card pool is very small, and you really are going to need the deck's exclusive cards, like the allies that come in it. One huge bonus to this though is that it comes with a copy of Call to the Grave, meaning that we get to include that copy despite it being like a $30 card on the secondary market. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at my starting point for this deck. While you can go at this from the perspective of upgrading the Armory deck, I actually tackled this project in the opposite way, taking my tuned Gravy Bones list, removing the legendaries and the expensive Majestics, and working from there. This left me with a 42 card main deck and a 6 card inventory, meaning that there was quite a bit to fill in. Thankfully though, there were enough cheap options to make this deck function very similar to a tuned list. If you watched my original video, you'll already know what this deck's goal is, but for those who haven't seen it, allow me to do a quick recap. The game plan with Gravy Bones is to spend the first few turns of the game generating gold, getting allies into grave, and then resurrecting them. For a good chunk of the game, you'll be trading attacks back and forth, and you really want to try to get to a game state where you have 2 to 3 allies on board, with your opponent unable to clear them every turn. Once you have that board state, you'll want to shift to using a mix of go-again attacks and enablers for your allies so that you can go wide enough to overwhelm the opponent. Thankfully, this budget Gravy Bones deck is capable of doing all of that. Jumping into my first budget build, the equipment was the easiest thing to replace, as the Armory deck comes with the suitable head, chest, and arm replacements. All of these help you get your allies into grave and block a bit, which is solid, but we have 0 gold generation here, which is the one significant difference between this and a tuned build. Of course, Mage Master Boots is dirt cheap and is still the best card to use to flood the board with bodies, so you'll want to run it. As for the main board, well, there were a few things that I had to consider. First was that pesky gold generation that was now missing with the equipment. The second was replacing the Chums and Whaler Humperdinks. Third was go-again enablers, since I had removed all the rum generation. And fourth was pure damage output that the Whalers, and more specifically the Conquerors, had fulfilled. There was a lot to do, but with 18 mainboard slots, this wasn't an impossible task. First and foremost, 9 Tipples and 2 Oyston to aid in gold generation. Honestly, I should have just been on 9 Tipples even in my tuned build, but you need all of them here since you can't just hook throughout the game. And it's the same with Oyston. He's not the flashiest ally, but making a gold on death and being able to play and swing with him for free is decent enough. Now when it came to replacing the Chum and Whalers, well, this was actually easier than I thought. Starting with Chum, I decided to replace him with a couple Barnacles. See, while we can't replicate the mini ALS ability on Chum, Barnacle is cheaper to play, but still swings for 4 and costs nothing to attack with. And this low cost is actually pretty relevant because we don't have the dead threads to rely on. And while Barnacle is easier to kill than Chum, something I found that while playing him is that people will tend to ignore him for a turn or two if you have other bigger allies out, meaning that you can actually get a decent amount of value off of him. As for the Whalers, this came in the form of just adding a second Murray Le Fay and 2 Chatters in the sideboard. Whaler is a bit hard to replace since nothing else swings for 11, but into slower matchups where he's usually best, you can use Murray to pump out your other allies and maybe buy some time with Chum's life gain. As for go-again enablers, well, I still kept the flying highs and decided to add 2 blue lead the charges. This card gives you an action point when you play an action that costs 2 or more, which includes Anka, Barnacle, Sawbones, and Swabby. And keep in mind, your first ally from grave gets go again, so you can play the ally and attack with it using that extra action point as go again on the attack. But with the allies and go again filled, I then had to make sure the deck had some decent damage in the form of a big attack. And while Conqueror of the High Seas is out of bounds, there's another gigantic boat that actually comes in the Armory deck, Battalion Bark. While it doesn't have go again, this boat swings for a whopping 9 if you have have High Tide. This will always be a chain ender, but swinging for a quarter of your opponent's life total is surprisingly pretty good. Like, who knew? Now, while these changes made up most of the deck, I still had some blue slots to fill, and so 3 Jittery Bones and 2 Loot the Arsenals were the cards I chose. Getting more allies into grave and presenting Arsenal disruption in lieu of Conquerors seemed like good options to start with. All that was left was the sideboard, and this was the part that I knew was likely to change the most since, I had yet to test the deck. With a few open slots, I threw in 3 Fate for Scenes, a couple Time Snaps for slower matchups, and a 3rd No Room piece. With that done, I now had a deck that honestly had a majority of what a tuned list included, and I was even able to keep Chart the High Seas due to it being fairly cheap. And this is incredible since it helps you dig, creates gold, and can even give you extra resources all in one card. Even better, since we're not running Conqueror of the High Seas, you don't need to worry about hitting it under the blue you saw with your compass. This initial build was certainly not perfect, but after the time I spent building my Toon deck, I had a pretty good grasp on how to build and play Gravy. Like, sure, I'm not what you would call a pro player, but after being in this game for over 4.5 years, I'd like to think that I'm pretty decent at this point. And with the first version of the deck built, it was time to actually go and test it. And hey, I had an armory that night, so I just had to throw my deck in my bag, grab my codex, and go play some games. Except that I forgot to bring my codex journal with me, so even though I knew what I wanted to change after testing, I wasn't able to leave myself some notes to look back on. And honestly, you don't want to make the same mistake. Use the link below or code Sloopdoop at checkout to get yourself 10% off a codex journal so that you can prove you're smarter than me by, actually remembering to bring it with you. There's even 2 Gravy Bone themed journals and a newer, smaller codex that fits perfectly between your arsenal and equipment, making it perfect for tight spaces. Seriously though, these journals are fantastic. Like, I know this is a plug, but I genuinely use mine every time I'm either testing an armory deck or building a deck myself. If you want to help support the channel and you don't feel like joining the Patreon, consider getting yourself a codex journal instead, and it'll help you level up your own skills as well. Anyways, after those few games at the armory that I couldn't track, I had a few takeaways for what to do next. 1. Barnacle was surprisingly solid. I expected him to just be okay, but turns out, without Give No Quarter or Dead Threads, having a 2-cost ally that swings for 4 for free was really good. I definitely wanted a 3rd copy of it. 2. Even though I wanted to make the deck as cheap as possible, I also wanted it to function, and having no rum generation just wasn't going to cut it. And finally, 3. My sideboard was an embarrassment to all of mankind. I am deeply, deeply sorry for this. It was time to make some changes, which were actually quite straightforward to do. While I loved Swiftwater Sloop, mostly because it's got my name in it, I find that the card can be really good, while other times, I just wished that it blocked 3 instead. So I decided to cut it to 2 to fit the 3rd copy of Barnacle. If I was gonna have a bad blocker, I might as well just go all in and play a non-block. This would land me at 17 allies, which is 2 more than most decks run. However, one thing this deck has that tuned lists don't is 3 pieces of armor that help us get allies into the grave. And because we've got those equipment pieces, I opted to remove the blue Jittery Boneses for Tip the Barkeeps. See, one of my games that I had played with the first budget version had been against a tuned Gravy Bones list, which I actually won because I had much more experience with the hero than my opponent. But it was a close game, coming down to him running out of cards, and the one thing I really struggled with was getting enough go again to apply pressure in the late game. Being able to bank a rum for later is really powerful since it can be used on both playing and attacking with your allies. So even though a playset is about $30, this is like the one card that you need. But with the main board done, I now had to actually make a real sideboard. Like, Time Stat Potion? Really, dude? Anyways, the changes I made here were cutting Fate for Scenes to 2 and removing the Chowders and Time Snaps completely. In their place, I put the 3 Blood in the Waters and 2 Seafloor Salvages. Blood in the Waters were only about $3 and it's a really good D-React, especially with this deck having a couple extra allies. As for Seafloor Salvage, well, it's a blue that can put itself into grave and helps counter the mirror. If your opponents are so rude as to play the Chums and Whalers that we can't, then you just flip them down and make a gold. Worst case, if they don't have an ally engraved to flip, you can use it on your own yellow tipples or just block with it. And with these changes made, I wanted to get some more games in, and thankfully I did remember to write some notes for at least a few of them. I ended up playing 5 more games, with 2 being against Verdance and the rest being another Gravy Bones Mirror, Bolton, and Syndra. All of these decks were far more expensive than mine, and the only game that I lost was against Syndra. Honestly, I was finding myself incredibly impressed with this deck. Like, sure, you're going to have a rough time into your bad matchups like Syndra, but I think that's to be expected. If a matchup is already hard even with a fully tuned Gravy Bones list, then it's only going to be harder with a budget list. But into the many, many heroes that don't just steamroll you right away, this deck was proving to be actually really strong. I had a game versus my buddy Rael on Verdance, and he decided to try and keep up with my board state instead of trying to race, just to see if it would be a better strategy. And I won that game at 38 life. And I didn't even have to take the 2 from Waning Moon, I just let it hit because I was starting to feel a little bad for him. Now, I actually almost stopped here at this 1.1 build and made this video. I was winning more games than I was losing, and as I said, the deck was functioning really well. However, I then played another mirror, and even though I won it for a 3rd time, this was also only because I had more than 65 cards, whereas my opponent only ran 60. I just kept finding that these games were cutting very, very close, and the one thing I felt like the deck needed was just a few more ways to deal with allies while not taking away from the rest of my strategy. Thankfully, there was a card my opponent had been running that was really appealing the more I'd seen him use it: Red Saltwater Swell. While I was already running the blues, the red was yet another way to turn on the barks and sloops, but it was also an amazing tool to help clear allies. And so despite the fact that the deck was already working quite well, I decided to tweak it one last time to bolster the mirror specifically. But when it came to removing cards, well, this is where I actually had to think for a bit. See, I knew I didn't want to remove any blues, especially not when the card I was adding needed your deck to be full of them, but I also didn't want to just remove the sloops of the barks, considering they were the cards that would benefit the most from the red saltwater swells. Now, I was willing to cut one of the barks because while 9 power is crazy high, it's only a chain ender, and I was never happy with seeing 2 in one hand, and so cutting it down to a 2 of still let the deck lean into its power, but also lowered the chance of drawing 2 in a single hand. As for the other 2 cards to remove, well, I mean, I'd been running 2 more allies than most people were. So yeah, it was time for 1 Oyston and 1 Swabby to say goodbye. 15 allies in the main board was still more than enough, and these were the only 2 I really felt comfortable cutting. With 9 golden tipples and 3 portside exchanges, Oyston was still a good card, but not completely necessary at 2, and while Swabby is a huge ally to swing with, he is very resource intensive, so cutting Oyston to 1 and Swabby to 2, along with the 1 cut battalion bark, I was able to slot in the 3 red saltwater swells. And with the main board figured out, I decided that there was also one more thing I could do for the mirror with my sideboard. See, I had still been running 5 defense reactions, but honestly the deck didn't really need the Fate for Scenes, and when I was thinking of what cards I could add that could help out the mirror, I came across an option that felt so obvious that I cannot believe I hadn't considered it before. Blanch! This is a 3 cost 7 that, if it hits, shuts off all colors for your opponent's cards until the end of their turn. This means that if you hit an opposing Gravy, pretty much the entire deck just stops working. Your blues don't activate High Tide, you can't play allies from grave, and cards like Chart the High Seas, Golden Tipple, and Portside Exchange just literally don't work. This means that your Gravy opponents will have to block it if possible, which is still great because you're taking at least 2 cards in an equipment block from them, or a Blood in the Water if they have it. So either way, if they don't already have a board assembled, you just straight up shut off their next turn. And even if they do have some allies, at least you stop them from bringing back a whole bunch more. Plus, Blanch is also amazing into Prism, who is a very rough hero for Gravy Bones to face. Now, to be fair, you're still probably going to lose to her, but at least this helps a little bit. I'm just glad that I'm our resident Prism player, so I don't have to face her. And so with those final changes, this is the finished version of my budget Gravy Bones deck. You have all your engine cards to generate gold and put allies into the grave, you've got all your go again attacks and enablers, and you still get to run a lot of the solid allies that come with the armory deck. But I'm just glad I have a final build I am happy with, and now all that's left is to show you that this deck can actually win games. And while I had a few recorded wins to choose from, I decided that the best way to show you how good this budget deck is was by going over the mirror. The game I'm going to show you is this budget Gravy deck that costs around $120 facing off a Gravy Bones deck with both the Eye of Ophidia and Riches of Tropoldani, making that build cost about $2,000. Yeah. But before we get to that, I want to show you a quick highlight from one of the games I had versus Ira. See, Gravy has this cute little quirk where he's really strong if you draw your engine pieces and allies together, but sometimes, well... Top one's a yellow and another yellow. Actually, that's fine.
Vanilla blue. Vanilla blue.
I as well use them. Draw a card. Pitch a barnacle to draw another card. What the fuck? Hey, now I'm hitting my allies. There was 4 on top. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because I'm trying to get into a blue. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on top.
Hey, your allies sucked.
That's 6. That is on top of my deck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. If you're wondering, yes, I'm still salty about that. Anyways, let's take a look at this budget deck in action, shall we? Going into the Gravy Mirror, I knew that the game was going to come down to board control. Slower decks let you amass an ungodly board state, faster decks force you to play a more back and forth tempo game, and the Gravy Mirror is a constant back and forth of board clearing. Both of us are going to be attacking each other's allies immediately, and so whoever could break that parity as life totals dwindled was likely to win the game. For sideboarding, I swapped out Battalion Barks for Blanches, loot the arsenal for the seafloor salvages, and then I just added the Limpets and Moray Le Fays to the deck to give me 65 cards. The Morays were a bit questionable considering you don't really get to keep a board state to pump up in the mirror, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to be fatigued. Running out of allies is a surefire way to lose this mirror. That said, you could probably get away with just adding the Limpets. Now when it comes to how I wanted to play this matchup, I had 2 goals. Be aggressive with my attacks to not let my opponent amass a bigger board state, but be conservative with my allies and resources so that I don't burn out in the late game. Without the hook, I was on a limited amount of gold, and so I didn't want to spend it recklessly, and I also knew that if the board was clear, I might not want to play an ally because it would just die immediately when I passed the turn. One other thing that I always prioritize in the early game is pitching cards like Avast Ye, Flying High, and Lead the Charge so that I can lean on them in the late game to take control. In fact, that's my game plan to do everything except for the super fast decks like Syndra. I even try to save Murderous Rabbles for the late game if I can, because a lot of the time you end up in this game state where your opponent is almost dead, but they're blocking everything, and you just need that one extra attack to actually deal that last point of damage. And so with the sideboarding done and my game plan of keeping the board clear while conserving as many resources as possible set, it was time to see if this budget Gravy deck could take down a fully tuned list. Starting off, I win the die roll and choose to go first since Gravy loves to set up. And thanks to a red tipple, I'm able to discard a Limpet, use a gold for Gravy's ability to discard a Sawbones, play a Tip the Barkeep to bank a rum for later, and recur the Sawbones to swing with it, getting the Swabby out of my hand. My buddy Rael starts his turn also with the red tipple, killing my Sawbones, and after a Chart the High Seas hits 2 blues, he recurs a Chum, plays Loot the Hold, activates Hook, and swings for 4. Not wanting to take the on hits, I use all my armor to block, discarding 2 allies to the Tricorn and Washed Up Wave. With 6 health, Chum is a little annoying to clear, but thankfully I drew my 1 copy of Call to the Grave, so I use it to grab a Rigor Mortis to clear it. I then arsenal a Seafloor Salvage, hoping to banish an ally from Rael's grave later. Unfortunately, my Rigor Mortis is not long for this world as he's immediately taken out by a blue tipple. This is followed by a red saltwater swell that hits the sea legs and then a Limpet with a hook activation. While I really don't want to give him a gold, I need my hand to forward my own game plan, and so I take it and go to 35. I start my turn with the Chart the High Seas, hitting a blue and a barnacle because I am never punished. After that, a yellow tipple and Gravy's ability brings me to 6 allies in grave, while Rael still has none. This was, on one hand, awesome because it meant that I had the advantage here, but it also meant that the Seafloor Salvages in my arsenal and now my hand were currently useless. With help from a Flying High, I play the Barnacle and swing with it, finishing my turn with Moray Le Fay and her instant ability to put a counter on the Barnacle. Now I had felt like this was mostly pointless because I expected Barnacle to immediately die, but Rael instead sends a tipple at Moray. Thanks to pitching a Riches of Tropeldani and discarding a Sea Legs, he does get an extra gold and a rum, but still no allies. And unfortunately for him, his next card in deck is also another Sea Legs, and after using Gravy to discard it, he just passes turn, leaving the Barnacle alive. Murderous Rabble for 3 gets me a blue and grave, and with the rum I made on my first turn, I play out my second Moray Le Fay and a Limpet. I attack for 2 and then 6 with a second counter on Barnacle, bringing Rael all the way down to 23, and I pass without using all the cards in my hand. And while this is usually a bad idea in Flesh and Blood, I really wanted to conserve my attacks for his allies rather than just chipping damage here. And unfortunately for Rael, after using a gold to draw, he sends a blue swell to kill Limpet, but reveals a Blood in the Water. This forces him to pitch a Conqueror of the High Seas to send a red swell at the Barnacle to kill it. But even worse, he then considers attacking with the card in his arsenal, and he half pitches his last card, revealing that he has another red swell. Like, Man, that red on top really screwed up this turn for him. But that's just what happens with gravy sometimes. I'm just glad that it's not happening to me. And to rub salt in the wound, on my own turn, I use my own blue swell, hitting the blue that I knew was on top. This let me float 5 juicy resources, attacking with a limpet, and immediately getting punished by a sunken treasure that hits my sawbones in grave. So all I can do now is put a counter on limpet and pass. After clearing my board with a tipple and swell, Rael finally gets an ally in grave, and after hitting me with a murderous rabble, he then plays a rigor mortis and brings me to 26. With our life total starting to even out again and my flood of allies long gone, I'm actually starting to feel a little bit worried. If Rael starts to hit all of his allies, this game could go very, very badly for me. What's worse is that my next turn is quite bad, where all I really accomplished is killing the rigor mortis. Thankfully though, Rael also has a bad turn where he's forced to pitch 2 Conquerors and a Blanche just to play an attack with a Sawbones, and thank God for that, because I do not want to have to face down either of those attacks right now. I finally play the Seafloor Salvage for my arsenal, just hitting a Sea Legs for the gold. I really wanted to save it for an ally, but I just couldn't keep ending my turn with extra cards in hand. I do kill his Sawbones with the tipple, but that's all I do as I arsenal and pass it back. Rael uses a Call to the Grave to get a Swabby, which is bad in 2 ways. 1, he now has a big-ass ally to swing with, and 2, he gets to shuffle his deck, meaning that those Conquerors he pitched earlier are now no longer at the bottom. After another chart that hits 2 blues, he plays in a Vast-G and swings for 7, and considering he already has 3 gold, I figure 1 more wouldn't do that much, and I just go to 15. Now, I do want to pause for a moment here because I think that playing the Avast G was actually the wrong move here. Gravy needs to play blues to be able to recur allies, but quite often you will draw hands where you either don't have enough blues, or you can just do way more if you don't need to play the ones from hand. So I really do think that the correct move here was to arsenal the Avast G, since it would have been more powerful later. A big part of playing Gravy is giving up your life total to amass a board state, and arsenaling an extra blue, especially one that's free to play, is crucial to achieve this. But what's done is done, and the turn passes to me. I start by killing Swabby with a red swell, then use a tipple to discard an Oyston. I then decide to gamble on a blind chart, and I am still never punished because I hit a blue and a Swabby, now floating 7 freaking resources, which, like, I feel like that shouldn't be a thing, but it is, and I'm doing it. With all these resources and with allies finally back in grave, I decided that it was time to use the Mage Master Boots to play out the Swabby and Oyston and swing for 7. A Blood in the Water blocks it for 6 and gets a Chum into grave, and then I pass it back. And Rael's turn is a very short one, as he finally does get to send one of those Conquerors he reshuffled into his deck, except he has to attack Swabby instead of me. And I really can't blame him here, since he definitely can't let me keep a 7 power ally, but man, that's a really rough use of such a powerful card. This also leaves me with a full hand, and with the help of Portside Exchange and a yellow tipple, I'm able to get more allies into grave, play an Anka, and bring Rael down to 11 with it. With his own Portside Exchange and blue tipple, Rael fills his grave and kills my Oyston. Now, one of the allies that he put into grave here was a Whaler Humperdinck, which could probably end the game if he played it out and attacked with it, but with only a few resources left, he just sends a Sea Legs at my Anka to clear it. And since I have yet another turn with a full hand, I am set up to really start taking this game. With no allies on his board, I'm able to attack Rael directly with a red swell, floating 5. He does block with the Sunken Treasure, hitting my Barnacle, but I don't care at this point. A yellow tipple brings him to 9, and after using some gold, I use my Graven Juice Decor to discard Rigor Mortis, using those 2 resources for a Swift Water Sloop. Rael blocks this with a Call to the Grave for 2, leaking 4, although he accidentally only ticked down 3 life, and I only noticed this as I was watching the gameplay back. Thankfully, this doesn't make any difference to the game result though. I play a Tip the Barkeep to bank a rum and finish my turn with a Rigor Mortis, swinging for 6. This turn was a total of 17 damage spread across 4 attacks. I now have Go Again for later, and I still have a body on board. And with Rael going down to 3, which should have been 2, and only keeping 1 card in his hand, I was now set to win the game. And I think Rael was really starting to feel this, because all he can do on his own turn is use Gravy's ability and then use Dead Threads to send a tipple at my Rigor Mortis. On my turn, I use a Lead the Charge to play both a Limpet and Anka, attacking with both of them and bringing Rael down to 1. Now, obviously, this would have been lethal if he hadn't made the mistake of only taking 3 instead of 4 earlier, but again, we didn't catch it during the game. This does have a small impact because he probably would have blocked with his Dead Threads here as well if it was the lethal it should have been, meaning that he won't have the free resources for his very next turn, although all he does with it is use it to kill a Limpet. And this wasn't going to help him. Even though my Chart the High Seas didn't give me the extra blue for the Swiftwater Sloop in my arsenal, the Blanche that I throw at him gets the kill with the breakpoint thanks to 2 non-blocks in his hand. Now, of course, he could have used the dead threats here to live, but considering he would have had to block with them last turn if his life total had been correct, this actually kind of clears up that mistake. But even if he blocked them and stayed alive here, what was he gonna do? I had full tempo of the game, I had Rum on board, and cards like Murderous Rabble and Avasti still in my deck. Like, he was gonna be dead in another turn or 2 at most. Despite my deck costing around $1,800 less than Rael's, this game shows that what truly makes Gravy Bones strong is the power of his engine cards and the sheer value of his allies, all of which you can do for pretty cheap. The expensive stuff helps, obviously, but I don't think it matters nearly as much as playing the deck well, and I really hope that this game proved that. Gravy Bones is genuinely one of the most fun heroes I have ever played in Flesh and Blood. People keep saying the deck is like Yu-Gi-Oh!, and honestly, they're not even wrong. You're using engine cards like Saltwater Swell and Golden Tipple and Chart the High Seas to burn through your deck, and most of the time you don't really care about what your opponents are doing. As long as you have some life total and aren't being constantly disrupted, you just keep doing your own thing. I played quite a few games with this budget list and I won way more than I lost, although ninjas are still a genuine nightmare. But into a lot of decks, this budget list absolutely has the power to go toe to toe, and it does so for a fraction of the price. So if you give this deck some time and practice, it can serve you well even if you don't upgrade it past this. But if you do want to upgrade it, you can add the cards that maybe you already have or pick things up slowly and add them over time at your own pace. I mean, let's be real, not everyone can just dump a grand on a deck right away, and I think a lot of people would much rather slowly build up to a tuned build over time. In fact, that's kind of one of the reasons that I do these budget videos. I know that not everybody's going to be able to just buy an expensive deck right away, so I want to offer something that's very solid for, a fraction of the price. But I do think that will be all for this video. I could continue to yap on about this deck for another hour, but considering I'm the one who still has to film and edit this video, I think I'll end it here. Thank you all very much for watching, and an extra special thanks to all of the patrons. I really appreciate you guys' patience with these longer videos. They take a lot to put together. Huge shoutouts to the GigaChads Geeks first, Elixir, Vinny, John, Ty, Chemical, and Dark Memoria. Then we've got the Alpha Chads, Thomas, Zajima, and Approximo, and then there's the Super Chads, Cece, Ben, Yogvadoodles21, Kevin, and Wolf Shadowmancer. Thanks again as always, and stay Chadly, my friends.